Welcome to the JOWMA podcast, presented by the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association. Every week, hear from expert medical professionals as they share up-to-date insights on health topics to help you live your best life physically, mentally, and emotionally. Join us as we navigate the ever-changing landscape of healthcare and strive to improve the health of the Orthodox Jewish community.
Dr. Shevie Kassai is a board-certified general and trauma surgeon currently working at Mountain View Surgical Team. She was born and raised in Denver and completed medical school in Israel. She returned to Denver and did her internship and residency in general surgery at the University of Colorado. She completed a research fellowship in trauma surgery, and her research has been published in medical journals, including the Journal of American College of Surgeons, Injury, and the American Surgeon. She is certified in robotic surgery and serves as the medical director of the Wound Care and Advanced Hyperbaric Center at the Medical Center of Aurora. She lives with her husband and children in Denver and enjoys skiing, running, traveling, and spending time with her family.
Right. Hi, Shevie. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here. First to start off, I know it's spelled differently, but do you got a lot of questions with if your last name was related to like the Kassai surgical procedure? Because that was, as a pediatrician, my initial thought.
All the time. Even on residency interviews, I remember. And I was like, well, number one, it's spelled differently.
Right.
Number two, do I look like I'm related to an Asian surgeon? I don't know.
I see. I don't even named after. I don't know if it's like named after the person who came up with the surgery or like the patient. So it could have been. Okay. So you mentioned you just got back from Israel. I know this is not the first time you went since the war started. So tell me a little bit about the trips that you've been on and kind of the goals of each of the missions.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was the second trip that I went on since the war started. The goals of the trips were the same as the goals that, any American Jewish individual has, and has had since the war started, which is, see how we can help our brothers and sisters in Israel right now. But as a physician, there were specific things that I was able to help with, and specifically as a trauma surgeon, with a unique set of capabilities and skills that allowed me to go with an armamentarium of um, knowledge and skills, technically that I was able to use to help Israelis who are in pain right now.
So I had seen pictures of, I think, probably your first mission, and it looked like you were maybe doing some education or like some sim labs. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so the first time I went, which was back in I think the end of October / early November, we worked with Dr. Kapua, who's one of the emergency medicine doctors at Ichalov, on providing training sessions to civilian physicians as well as civilian physicians as well as military physicians, and lay people who are, a lot of medics and paramedics, giving them the information and tools they would need to be able to provide care in the field, for injured patients, and also in other mass casualty situations, God forbid, if those occur. So training sessions in that regard. So it was a lot of hands-on. There were some didactic PowerPoints and sort of, talking to people and stuff like that. But it was really hands-on sorts of sessions, teaching people how to do procedures related to emergency airways, chest tube, chest decompression, and sort of what we have in the States, sort of, we call it stop the bleed here. So it's just explaining to people, again, with clinical training or physicians and lay people, how to properly apply a tourniquet, because you'd be surprised, a lot of people don't necessarily know, and little things like that can save lives.
For sure. I think that training is super important. So it's amazing that you were able to use your like regular sort of trauma surgeon day-to-day skills to be able to train people who maybe don't do this regularly. I saw pictures, I think more recently, of the second trip that you went on and you were actually operating. So tell me a little bit about that experience and how you were able to just kind of like jump in and, basically function as an Israeli surgeon.
Yeah, I think functioning as an Israeli surgeon is the same as functioning as an American surgeon, except there are some language differences. I did go to medical school in Israel, so that helped, even though medical Hebrew is not the same as going to a restaurant and going shopping in Israel Hebrew. So it certainly did take a little bit of reacquainting myself with medical vernacular, but it's just like it's like riding a bike, and the terminology is sort of universal in a sense, and ORs are ORs everywhere. But in terms of, I mean, what's your specific question? Like what operations I did,
So
or
I guess
like?
yeah, so I guess maybe tell me the sort of process. So you came in with the intention of what? Were there surgeons that weren't able to operate because they had been called up, or was there a shortage of surgeons for whatever reason? What was kind of like the purpose of
Yeah,
that
so
mission?
I think there's both, to borrow some terminology from the vascular surgical world, there are inflow and outflow problems here. There's an inflow problem where there are more patients. Patient volumes are a little higher right now because unfortunately there are casualties, both civilian and military, related to the war. But on the other side, there's also the issue that a lot of physicians, basically all male physicians between the ages of 25 and 50, have been pulled and sent to the field where they're urgently needed. Now, some of those, that was some of the training that we did back in November, for you take a rheumatologist or a dermatologist or a pediatric cardiologist, who all of a sudden is the medic for their unit and is expected to be able to do things like manage someone's airway, and that's really outside their comfort zone. So a lot of it was helping those individuals feel comfortable with field triage. But anyway, back to what's going on now. Surgeons from all hospitals, to a certain extent, have been pulled into the field if that's where they are needed right now. So at the hospital that I went to right now, most recently, which is Zeev Hospital in Tzfas, 3 of the surgeons in the Department of Surgery were, are currently reservists in the military. And so essentially my role is to serve as a substitute surgeon in that regard. So just doing the same things I do here in the States, but in a different language.
So you mentioned like an OR here is an OR in Israel, but were there any either unexpected or even expected differences either in the way that the OR is set up and procedures and in equipment and anything that like if you just walked into your OR in Denver and walked into your OR in Israel and you were blindfolded, not knowing where you walked in, anything that stood out?
It's sort of the same. It's like if you walk into a shul in, if you go on vacation, you're in, Morocco or you're in Venice, and you walk into a shul, a sitter is a sitter. You're going to find the same place to go sit. There's a women's section here and the men's section there, and everything is sort of, routine. And so, in that regard, things are pretty much standard everywhere in the world. I mean, there are nuances. There are different techniques, but those are all sort of differences in terms of surgeon preference. But I mean, really, it's kind of universal, which was what makes it amazing and what makes it so easy, I think, for people with a unique set of skills to go anywhere. I mean, people go on mission trips all the time, not just to Israel. People go on these mission trips to Africa and China and whatnot. But that's why it's easy to take a set of translatable technical skills and take those with you anywhere, because you don't really need much else besides your brain and your hands. Speaking Hebrew was definitely essential. Being able to speak in Hebrew, being able to document in Hebrew, being able to talk to patients in Hebrew, because realistically speaking, without that, it makes it really hard, and then you're just kind of a burden, kind of like a glorified shadow. But yeah, if you speak Hebrew, it's just like going anywhere else. It's like moving from one hospital to another in Brooklyn to Queens or something. So.
I like that chill analogy. So it's pretty cool that you were able to just like pick up and start operating in a foreign country. It sounds like you had a huge advantage, both being able to speak and so you had trained in Israel, so I'm sure that was helpful to some extent, but you hadn't been there, since med school, which I'm guessing was a little bit ago. Was there anything sort of surprising or like any differences just in healthcare, not necessarily in the surgical field, but healthcare as a whole, that had changed since you were there for training?
Um, Gosh, now I feel like a dinosaur because so in the middle of when I was in medical school there is sort of, and it was the same in the States, that's sort of when transitions to EMR, or electronic medical records, started. So that was definitely a jump for me. I mean, obviously that's all I use here, between Epic and Meditech. There's lots of systems we use, but using the chameleon system in Israel, which is sort of standard there. But that was a little new to me because that was kind of just coming out when I was in med school. So when I was a medical student and we wrote notes on our rotations on the wards, we were still writing those by hand, and then a resident would co-sign it, and so that was new. But I mean, it's not really. I mean, that's sort of a universal new thing. So it certainly makes things faster and more efficient. So it's obviously great. The only other difference that I'd say, and I remember this just, transitioning from being a medical student in Israel and then doing like away rotations in the States. And then when I, moved back to the US for, internship and residency and whatnot. The other difference that is very still staggeringly apparent is that I think in the US, there is much more of an early emphasis on aggressive, early defensive diagnostic imaging in order to formulate your differential. Whereas I think that in Israel, the training for medical students and residents is still a little more traditional. I don't want to use the word old fashioned because that makes it sound antiquated or bad, but it's still more traditional, wherein it's, you really go get a more thorough history and physical exam, and then are more deliberate in terms of decision making about which imaging studies are appropriate. It's not that they're not getting imaging, but I think that there is a little more thought. I was really impressed with that, both amongst the ER doctors who call us about things, and then amongst the residents. There's much more thoughtfulness in terms of when people get imaging, not just routinely ordering pan scans on everyone and whatnot. So I mean, there's a time for that too as a trauma surgeon, but that
Right.
was refreshing for me to see and just kind of opened my eyes a little bit to how, I guess, spoiled sometimes we are here with the US healthcare system. Yeah, and even in, it's, Israel's not a third world country or anything from it. I mean, they have one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world, but how the system is just a little bit different there, and it's just more of a European style. So that
That's
was
a
the
really interesting. That's an interesting observation. I find that there's differences like that in the US, even with different states. Maybe some more, more litigious states, you're gonna be more
yeah,
aggressive, just kind of like work up more stuff. Do you think that
yeah.
difference in Israel of being maybe more intentional and less pan scanny, is a reflection of their healthcare system? Is it a reflection of the type of patients Israelis tend to be, or something else?
I think it's twofold. I think it's a reflection of the healthcare system. It is a socialized, healthcare system as opposed to here where, things are whatever sort of mix you have because of what Obama did to our healthcare system or whatnot. So, yes, and part of it is I think secondary to that, and then the other component I believe is the training model there is just different. It's sort of based more on a European training model, just in terms of if you think about there being 6-year programs and people going straight from high school to medical school, and then where they go to sort of complete fellowships a lot of times after residencies. And I think just from having been a surgeon in the States and working with surgeons who have trained in Europe, in Italy, in Sweden, in England, when I look at my colleagues, my former attendings, et cetera, who trained at such programs, I see that same mentality with them too. And so I think it's just a different mindset. And I don't think either one is good or bad. I think that there's benefits to how we do things in the US. There are benefits to how they do things in Europe slash the Middle East. And I think both are great, but there's something we can all learn from each other.
I think that's interesting. I'm sure it's like a very unique perspective that you're able to bring back, sort of to your, surgical practice here. And speaking of your surgical practice in America, what was that conversation like? Like with your partners at work, with, I don't know, your hospitals or chief of staff or whoever you had to go and be like, hey, I want to go to Israel for, I don't know, 2 weeks. What was
Yeah.
that? What was that like, and what was their response?
Well, I mean, I must say I have an amazing group of partners. I am a private practice surgeon in a general surgery practice where we all sort of have our own niche slash subspecialty. So, I really focus on trauma and acute care, as do a few of my partners. There are some breast surgeons, there are some surgical oncologists, there are some endocrine surgeons. So everyone kind of has their niche, but amongst those of us who really focus on the trauma, critical care, or acute care surgery side of things, a lot of our day to day life is really shift work. And that's part of what I love about my job is that I do a number of shifts per month. And, that's when I'm on, and when I'm off, I'm off. So, number one, in terms of how I practice and, what my life looks like as a doctor on a daily basis, this was something that was like realistically doable for me. Whereas when you have, a bunch of, elective surgeries that are scheduled, 3 months out, it's much more difficult to sort of cancel people and say, "Hey, I'm leaving for a few weeks." So I mean, we do make our call schedule a few months in advance, and so it took a little bit of advanced planning. But I have the most amazing group of partners who really are very. I mean, we're all parents. Everyone in the group has kids, and so everyone is really understanding of all of us having life events, lifestyle events, wanting to sort of plan things around our lives, our families, and not just our careers, which are important to all of us, obviously, but kind of working together to make that happen. And so, one of my partners is sort of the person who's in charge of kind of keeping the call schedule because someone has to be the person who does that Excel grid and deals with that calculus equation every month, which is crazy, and she's amazing. But I just told her, like, look, what time, this is what I want to do. This, at some point I want to be able to go for a couple of weeks. When are there the least number of people who are gone on vacation? When would it work best for everyone else? And I just found a time period that it work. So
That's amazing. That
yeah, I mean, I do have a great group. So shout out to Mountain View Surgical Associates of Colorado, because I think we're a good team.
that's fantastic. I wanna talk about the missions themselves a little bit more. Any memorable anecdotes or stories from either of the trips that you can share?
Yeah. I guess so. For my first trip, what I would share was I mean, that was the first time since medical school I had been in a sort of clinical environment in hospitals in Israel. And, training is long. Residency, I mean, it's arduous. You spend days and nights in a hospital, sort of in this like militaristic system, at least in surgery, where it's like being a Navy SEAL, where it's like, this is, I'm here, I have to get to here, and what do I need to do to get from like point A to point Z? And you just do it and you get through it. And so part of that, I think, in any specialty, but people in surgical specialties talk about it all the time, is like growing sort of a thick skin. And people always say that you have to have a thick skin, let things kind of roll off your shoulder, because it's you have to be hypercritical, you have to be able to accept criticism to grow. And so I think with that, I what I realized when I was in Israel at a Israeli hospital was, first of all, some of it was like, not PTSD is the wrong word. It was like deja vu, where I walked back in there and it elicited these emotions of, this is where and why I became so passionate about medicine, in general, and surgery specifically. I it kind of reignited that like love for me. But also, you realize that every single one of us in a certain sense becomes a little bit callous, because you see patients day in and day out, and they're just kind of, in a certain sense, they're all just faces and names and patients and medical record numbers, and you just do the same thing, and it's sort of by rote a little bit, which is a good defense mechanism that we all have to develop, because I know I have to have that cultivated and sort of really really honed in on a daily basis in order to be able to go home and be a good wife and mother, because you can't carry all of that baggage home with you on a daily basis. You have to be able to sometimes shut the door and go home so you can come back tomorrow and still be a good surgeon. Um, but in Israel, all of a sudden, you see all these young, otherwise healthy patients between the ages of 18 and 25 who are really just, a few years older than some of my kids. And, you see parents and siblings sitting outside their rooms, all sitting there just saying Tehillim, and they have the names that are the names of my kids and my nieces and nephews and my cousins. And that was overwhelming for me, I guess, on an emotional level. It was not something that I was prepared for. I don't think there was any way to prepare for it, but it was memorable. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but it regrounded me and made me appreciate the gift that I've been given, and the gift of the skills of surgery that I've been given, where I'm able to, help save lives and heal people because it just reminded me of wow, like look what is in front of you, appreciate what you have. So that was really memorable for me. I guess that's how I put it most succinctly. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. I think that's like a really unique, Jewish surgeon in right, or you read Jewish, any kind of doctor in a Jewish homeland taking care of Jewish patients type of thing that
Yeah.
probably is really challenging to get, in places in the US, maybe, I don't know, outside of our borough park colleagues. Um
Exactly, and I think you sort of, I think people, take not take advantage of it, but you lose sight of it, you just you don't appreciate it as much on a daily basis because it just becomes natural for you, so it just like, it was like a pressing a reset button for me, which was amazing. So that was, I think, from the first mission trip, what stuck with me the most. From the second mission trip, I would say probably the most memorable moment, I mean, because thankfully, the second time around, I didn't see as much trauma. I think, we're a little bit later. This was, I mean, I was there at the 100-day mark. So we're, it was between, 80 and 100 days in, tragically, to the the war and us still having 150 hostages that are still held in Gaza and close to 200 soldiers that have been murdered and thousands of Israeli citizens, our brothers and sisters who are still in pain, and it's affected every single one of us. But that said, we weren't seeing an influx of trauma patients every day. So it was a lot more, emergency surgery stuff, gallbladders and appendixes and bowel obstructions and those sorts of things. And then the trauma that we saw was more, motor vehicle collisions and just kind of your routine stuff. But that said, I think the most memorable moment was, like I said, like a little while ago, there were out of the surgeons in the Department of Surgery at the hospital I was at, 3 of them are in Miluim or reserves. And so, like, when I got there, my name got added to a WhatsApp group of, all the doctors in the department. It's just called, Ziv Surgery or something. And so, all the residents are in there and all the attendings, and it just sort of has like updates, like, this lecture got moved or whatever, things like that. And so my name got added. And so, one of the surgeons said, we'd like to welcome, Dr. Kassai, who's here for a couple weeks from the state, as, a volunteer surgeon. So, everyone please welcome her. And, people just, said hello and thumbs up and stuff like that. And then, like the next day, someone else responded, "Hey, is this the same Kasai who, went to, the Technion Medical School back, I don't know, like 15 years ago? And, did she do her surgery rotation or did you do your surgery rotation at this and this place?" And I mean, I just didn't recognize the number, and he didn't recognize my number either because I had an Israeli phone number and this is my US phone number. But anyways, so one of the soldiers who is right now a paratrooper, but is also a surgeon, Dr. Chovav Handler, was one of my he was the second year surgical resident when I was a third year medical student.
that's
And
so cool.
yeah, we sort of like, I mean, we kept in
And
touch
you
like
didn't realize like that he was a surgeon there
I
before
mean, I
before you
didn't,
came.
I mean, like, sure, we were friends on Facebook and this and
Uh-huh.
that, and I mean, we kept in touch, like, sporadically over the years, but, like, I don't look at people's Facebook occupations to see what hospital they work
Right.
at and stuff like that, like, I was a surgeon and I knew he was a surgeon, and that was the
Yeah.
end of it,
It's pretty
and so that
cool.
was really cool, and then the next week, he had a furlough for a couple of days, so he came to the hospital to, like, say hi so we could see each
Cool.
other to sort of, like, thank me for being a substitute for a couple of weeks, and so that was just a really neat, like, everything kind of coming together from, back in the day when I was a medical student and just seeing that like I really was making a difference because like here is a person who is fighting for the survival of our nation, out on the field and, is a fellow from Jew, fellow surgeon, and we knew each other from years past. And like, this is whose place I was taking. And I mean, I told my kids the story and they're like, oh wow, that's like because each of them in school is like given a name of like this is the specific chayal that like I'm supposed to be davening for every day. And so they're like, oh yeah, like it's the same sort of thing. Or like that's your
Right.
person.
Love
And so
it.
it's kind of neat. So
That's I love that. That's amazing. So loaded question. Do you have plans to go back?
I mean, I always have plans to go back to Israel. I mean, we have tickets booked, just, from a family perspective, but I really, really hope that, I really hope I don't have to go back for any, clinical reasons at all. So, but I am always, I keep my United itineraries open for my next trip to Israel always. So
Love that. I love that.
hopefully
You're
not as a
always
surgeon,
ready.
just as a mom and a tourist.
I love that. Okay, one last final question that I actually wanna start asking all of the guests. So ultimately, this is a preventative health podcast, and so something I'm always curious about are like any pearls that you wish just the general public would know. Something that maybe you see as a trauma surgeon, you're like, oh man, people
Absolutely.
just did this one thing, like right there. I don't know, they wouldn't get this one injury or like anything that obviously you're not a doctor that people necessarily want to,
You don't wanna see me, I'll
right?
say
We don't want to see
that.
you. You don't want to know a
And
trauma surgeon personally. So
I
anything
will
you
say,
wish.
Dr. Berkovich, I love reading your snippets every week in Michelle Come Magazine. I really look forward to them. Like, as a doctor, I'm like, what is she gonna say this week? What's she gonna comment on? And so I do think that getting that message out to the community is super important. So yeah, you don't wanna see me as a surgeon, you don't wanna see me as a doctor. I'm not the kind
For
of doctor.
sure, for sure. So
Happy to take
what
for
can
you.
people do? What can people do to lower, let's say, can't ever prevent right trauma fully, but what can we do to lower the risk of personally getting to know a trauma surgeon?
Absolutely. So I think number one, and you've written about this extensively, but I'm gonna just put another, I'm gonna put it out there again. Helmets, helmets, helmets. I don't care if your kid is riding a tricycle. It doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're rollerblading, if you're roller skating, if you're biking, if you're on a scooter, if you're on I don't even know what other kind of wheeled devices there are, but like, please wear a helmet. It doesn't matter if you're going, 10 feet or 10 miles, just please wear a helmet. I'll say that. Point number two related to that, because I did mention scooters. Motor scooters are so, 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 so bad. I can't tell you guys because I mean, my son, my oldest son in yeshiva. I mean, like all his friends, like they all ride around these little motor scooters to get to and from yeshiva and to whatever.
All the buckram,
They're
all the time.
right.
Yeah,
It's like a thing, and he's like, "Mommy,
totally.
can I get a scooter?" All my friends have scooters. I'm like, no, you can't. I don't care if they all have scooters. Their moms aren't trauma surgeons.
Right.
So, yeah, they are so, so dangerous. I mean, I don't know. I can't tell people don't buy them because people are gonna still buy them. All I can say is, never ever ride those while you're in any sort of capacity incapacitated. Never ride them intoxicated. I can't tell people. It's like saying don't smoke. You can't tell patients don't smoke because like they're gonna smoke anyway. So all I can say is, try to not smoke indoors. Try to not smoke near a radiator so you don't start a fire. So I'm not gonna tell people like don't ride scooters because they're still gonna ride them, but don't ever have like a glass of wine and then ride one of them. Never ride one of them without a helmet. Don't ride them. I literally saw a YouTube video a couple of days ago of someone riding one of those motor scooters on I-95 somewhere in Florida. It was like an only in Florida sort of video. Please don't do anything like that.
Yeah,
That's
that sounds like Florida. I trained in Florida.
right.
That checks out. Yeah.
Literally. Don't ride them in the rain. Just be as safe as possible with them. So yeah, I mean that's all for my non motor vehicle. I mean, I don't know what motor scooters classify as, but then from a motor vehicle standpoint, I will say I guess my trauma surgeon recommendations and asks and begs are please wear seatbelts.
That's
Make
the
sure
one I thought you would go with. Yeah.
gosh, yeah. And people, and I mean, I have friends, I have close family members. I have a lot of people who'll be like, well, I'm just going a few blocks. Well, I'm just going down the street. So, the statistics change and, 87% of statistics or whatever are made up, like whatever number you want to use. But a lot of accidents, I don't know what it is this year, but happen within a mile or so of home. So you're just taking your kids to school, or you're just finishing carpool, or you're just going to the supermarket, or you're just driving down the street, or you're just driving really slow, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Just put on your seatbelt. They force you to wear seatbelts these days. They beep until you turn them off. I mean, so you really have to sort of work around it to put the seatbelt behind you in order to not wear a seatbelt. So please wear seatbelts. Make sure your kids are properly seatbelted in the back seat. That's another thing we see a lot of. I can't tell you, I don't ever want to tell you, and no one should ever know the tragedies that I've seen from improper seatbelt use in back seats of cars, in rollover motor vehicle collisions on highways. Please make sure if you don't know how to buckle a car seat in, you can go to any pediatrician's office and they'll show you. Like, no one's gonna charge you. It takes 5 minutes, but if you don't know if you're doing it right, just ask. You can probably find some video online, but please make sure that your kids are seatbelted in properly. Don't double buckle kids. Don't throw extra kids in the back seat for carpool. It's never worth it.
Oh God, double buckle.
Right?
My worst nightmare. Okay.
I
Yeah,
know. So, yeah,
good
wearing
tips.
seatbelts,
Excellent.
yeah, I mean, that's it, and then, I mean, it's the stuff that I tell people, normally, don't drink and drive, and unfortunately, I think, our community, as much as we wanna say, "Oh, like, our community's not immune to those things either."
Mm.
Go out and drink, enjoy it, go have fun, go enjoy the wedding, have 3 glasses of wine. I love, a great cocktail, and I love really candy, raunchy sorts of wines and stuff, but then take an Uber or have a designated driver. And that applies to like teenagers Purim time. It
Yep.
applies to teenagers, Motzei Shabbos. It applies to men and women equally because you think that, and there was just some Mishpacha article about that too, where it was like, well, all these, men, their husbands come home after Kiddush club and then someone wrote in and they said, but like women have this problem too. So this
Sure.
affects genders, this affects all socioeconomic groups, this affects all religious groups. No one's immune. So don't think just because I'm from or I'm super yeshivish or because I whatever it is, it doesn't matter. So yeah, those are my biggest preventative health things, I'd say.
Good. Excellent. This
Yeah.
pediatrician, you're like, preaching to the choir, but all excellent things to keep in mind and remember. I think this episode is probably gonna come out around Purim time. So definitely very, very topical to keep all of those things in mind. I want to thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing both in the US and the recent mission trips that you took overseas to Israel and really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing amazing things from you in the future.
Of course, thanks for this, and I'm always happy to come on here. I'm always happy to answer questions. Med students, residents, pre-med students, other doctors and other specialties, or just lay people. My phone number, my email address, everyone at, JOWMA has all my info. Feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the JOWMA podcast. We welcome your feedback and ideas for future episodes. Send us an email at health@jowma.org. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform.